Good morning. You know, in life, there are two occasions that I can recall feeling fear. Not fear from my life or fear that would make me want to run another direction as far as maybe danger is to be considered. But there are two instances or situations in my life where I felt as though I was not going to measure up to the responsibility that God would want me to measure up to, or that I wasn't going to measure up to the responsibility the situation required me to meet. The first one, it was around 2005, around June, about 11 years ago. Coming back from our honeymoon, I loaded up our Jeep Cherokee Sport 94, 95 model and an 02 Grand Am two-door. I loaded it up, and sitting in my wife's parents' driveway, we loaded up everything that I didn't take down with my brother in a cattle hauler, a cattle trailer. I put everything in those two vehicles, and I got into my Jeep, and my wife began to drive off, headed to Bedford, Virginia. That was our new home. And as I put my Jeep, y'all know what a stick shift is? A clutch? Yeah, men used to drive those vehicles. I put it in first gear, and I glanced over at the front of her mom and dad's house, and I began to drive off, and I felt this chill go through my body, and it only lasted a split second. And I looked, and as Megan drove away from her parents' house, I realized, and I looked, and I was like, should I take them with me? Am I responsible for this woman from now on? I can't do this. And I started to stop and like, I don't know about this. I don't know about this. But it was a fleeting moment. And as I continued, because, you know, it's those moments that define us. Are we up for the challenge? Can we handle it? The other one was about 2 years ago, March. After March 28th, 2 or 3 days later, we were able to take our little girl home. I went out of Charleston's Women's and Children's right there into the hospital where you can pull up just in front of the door. And I remember taking that car seat, and she was 6 pounds. She was tiny, so fragile. Before we left the room, I remember looking out the window of the interstate, and I kept looking, thinking, there's no way I'm going to get on that interstate with everybody going 70 miles an hour with my daughter. It was war. And I remember putting her in the car seat, so fragile. I didn't know what was going on. I remember getting on the on-ramp. I was like 50 miles an hour, 55, and I was just like looking at the traffic around me. And if anybody would get even the remotely close to my truck, I would give them the stank eyes, like, do you know I got precious cargo in here? But I remember that moment of fear of thinking, we're taking this little individual home, and we're responsible for this? God is amazing. Yes, it's a very terrifying situation, but it defines you and how you react in those situations. I begin to reflect on this week's sermon of how we walk into a church for the first time, how we're accepted into a family for the first time. And as a pastor, you just, when you bring a pastor on, when I came in December, you know, you invited me into your family is what you've done. Megan and I and Elizabeth, you've invited us into your family. Not just forget membership, forget the church name, forget all that stuff that comes with it. Think about eternity. Think about the fact that we fellowship together, the way that we interact, the way that we treat each other, the way that we treat strangers when they come through the door. Look at Ephesians chapter 4. Mine's labeled Unity of the Spirit. Yours might be labeled something differently. Someone has left a Hall's cough drop up here, and I don't know whose water this is, but it was already open. I'm sorry. Hey, 14 years military, all right? 2-year-old, get over it. Thanks for the cough drop. It was not used. It's a brand new cough drop. I love you guys. Ephesians chapter 4, look in verse 1. And we're just going to go to verse 6. But starting in verse 1, unity of the Spirit. It says, therefore I, this is Paul writing, the prisoner of the Lord, implore you to walk in a manner worthy of the calling with which you have been called. Christians, act like Christians. Be worthy. Verse 2, with all humility, you can underline several words here. With all humility and gentleness, with patience, showing tolerance for one another in love. Verse 3, being diligent to preserve the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. Verse 4, there is one body and one Spirit, just as also you were called in one hope of your calling, one Lord, one faith, one baptism. Verse 6, one God and Father of all, who is over all and through all and in all. Isn't that good stuff? It's definitely good in 2016. If it's not God, it's the other guy. Who's the other guy? Satan. Thank you very much. It's one or the other. So we look in here how we're supposed to handle ourselves in the congregation. We have so much potential. Every church around the world, when they gather in love, when they gather in unity, and they pray for one another, and they encourage one another, the potential of that group is enormous if they're able to tap into it and understand the power that God has given them. We are made in the image of God, and that counts for something, doesn't it? I want to read something else. Turn just 2 chapters. Some of you might be 1 page. Ephesians chapter 2. Ephesians chapter 2. Excuse me. My voice is all kinds of crazy. Ephesians chapter 2. Look in verses 8 and 10. Just to add on to what Paul has said later on. He said this previously. Chapter 2, verses 8 and 10. It says, for by grace you have been saved through faith, and that not of yourselves, it is the gift of God. Not as a result of works, so that no one may boast. For we are his workmanship, created in Christ Jesus for good works, which God prepared beforehand, so that we would walk in them. I want you to think about that. God is constantly working on our lives, constantly placing us in situations, telling us to achieve. Set a goal. Here's my expectations for you. This is the role I want you to play. The first time for me, 2005, was to be a husband, to be a good husband. The next one, to be a good father. I have a video I want to show about the way that God continues to develop us. I want you to watch.